The McMurdo Dry Valleys region is the most extreme desert in the world, far colder and drier than any other desert on the planet. The mean annual temperature is minus 20 degrees Celsius. Total annual precipitation is less than 10 millimetres of water equivalent per year, because the valleys lie in the weather shadow of the Antarctic mountains. The dry valleys are usually very windy as the katabatic blasts sweep down from the polar plateau. Consequently, the only life forms that survive are primitive, relatively simple organisms like blue-green algae, the same as the algae you sometimes see in poorly maintained swimming pools. Many have been preserved for thousands of years. Centred only 125 kilometres from McMurdo Station and Scott Base, the easily accessible 4,800 square kilometres of the dry valleys have been extensively studied by United States and New Zealand scientists over many years. A lot of the features around McMurdo Sound were named by Lieutenant Robert Scott during the discovery expedition of 1901 to 1904, which was the first to winter over in the area. The sound itself was named by Captain James Clark Ross in 1841 after Lieutenant Archibald McMurdo of HMS Terror. On the 21st of January 1902, when Discovery first entered the Sound, Scott named a conical peak at the south end after the ship, and the mountains to the west the Royal Society Range, in honour of their financial support for his voyage. Individual peaks in the range were named after various past presidents of the Society. In September 1902, Lieutenant Albert Armitage, Scott's second-in-command and an accomplished navigator, made a 14-day reconnaissance sledge journey across the Sound from the winter quarters at Hut Point and discovered a glacier reaching into New Harbour, which later was named the Ferrar Glacier. Leaving the winter quarters on the 11th of September, the 6 men were able to use sledge sails for the first few hours in a favourable wind. From then on, though, it was a hard slog across some very dodgy thin sea ice, taking 6 days to cross 47 kilometres of ice to the foot of the glacier, later named after Hartley Ferrar, a member of the sledge team and the expedition's gawky 20-year-old geology graduate. Exploring from their camp, Armitage trekked up the glaciated valley for 6 kilometres, but concluded it was too rough for sledging, so not suitable as a route to the interior. By now all the party were feeling ill and weakened by scurvy, not a good omen for the far longer sledging journeys planned for later in the spring, so they returned to the ship after an absence of only 15 days. On the 29th of November, Armitage set out once again to explore to the west, this time with 2 6-man teams provisioned for 6 weeks, plus another 2 teams totalling 9 men provisioned for 3 weeks, the latter to assist Harry Ferrar to map the geology and collect rock samples. The food supplies had been modified to reduce the risk of scurvy. This time Armitage determined to follow up a valley in the foothills of the Royal Society Range, which he believed would lead to a pass through which he could penetrate to the interior. After crossing on the sea ice, the party camped at the southern end of the Strand Moraines, commencing the ascent of the Blue Glacier Valley after lunch the next day. It was slow going up the rough icy slopes to a summit plateau, which was reached 12 days after departure. Bad weather kept them in camp for another 4 days before they could attempt the steep descent to the Ferrar Glacier. Armitage described it as a most exhilarating run, far more exciting than the water chute at Earl's Court. Delayed for a day by a heavy sea mist which had rolled up the valley, they traversed the crevassed Ferrar Glacier to the foot of cliffs which Armitage named Cathedral Rocks, where they camped and established a depot. Meltwater trickling down the rocks provided a welcome ice-cold drink. There they found the carcass of a crab-eater seal, which must have crawled up nearly 50 kilometres from the coast to a height of some 600 metres. Progress was slow over the thin layer of wet, sticky snow that overlay the glacier surface, hiding the dangerous crevasses. After several days, the party reached the junction of two large glaciers, now known as the Ferrar and Taylor Glaciers. Armitage elected to follow the western Taylor Glacier across a basin, dipping down some 100 metres before rising again, as the Taylor Glacier appeared to be the best route to the ice cap. From there they made good progress. On Christmas Eve they camped under the lee of a remarkable-looking mountain Armitage named the Knobhead. There they celebrated Christmas Day, pinned down by a blizzard, by playing euchre and having fried cheese and bacon mixed with horseradish as their Christmas dinner. Starting again next morning, Armitage noted that the mountains to the south were quite dry, bare of snow and ice, with layers of red, brown and yellow sandstone and occasional black basalt sills running in remarkably even lines throughout the ranges, except where, here and there, a fault offset them. At a height of about 1,400 metres up the glacier, they were confronted with an icefall over which they dragged their sledges with great difficulty. Beyond the icefall, the glacier stretched away for many kilometres, sloping gradually upwards with a smooth surface apart from one other icefall. After negotiating this, they made another depot camp at the foot of a nunatak composed of chocolate-coloured columnar basalt. Crossing another 240-metre high icefall, they reached the edge of the plateau at a height of 2,500 metres above sea level on the 31st of December 1902. Yet another blizzard kept them in their tents on New Year's Day 1903 and through until the afternoon of the next day. On resuming the journey, Armitage became aware that all 6 members of his B team were suffering from altitude sickness. They made camp, and Armitage told them to stay and await his return in 5 days. That night, Armitage camped at 2,500 metres and observed a most beautiful parahelion, with long shafts of light shooting out from the sun on either side in lovely prismatic colouring. Armitage and his A-team slogged on across the hard icy surface until the 4th of January, when they made their last outward camp at an altitude calculated by Armitage as 2,740 metres and 163 kilometres from the coast. All around them there was nothing but a gently undulating white plateau. Reluctantly, Armitage turned back next day, pleased that at least he had pioneered a route to the plateau that would facilitate the next group of explorers. The return journey was relatively uneventful, Armitage collecting some rock specimens on the way at the foot of Finger Mountain. In the meantime, Ferrar and his party of 9 had been busy geologically mapping and sampling throughout the Taylor and Ferrar valleys, as well as the Royal Society Range. By now the sledges were starting to fall apart, making the ascent back up Descent Glacier a very difficult 12-hour slog. At 7:30 p.m. on the 19th of January, they arrived back at the ship after an absence of 52 days. 9 months later, on the 26th of October 1903, Scott and a party of 8 others left Hut Point to explore beyond the western limit reached by Armitage. They followed the northern edge of the Ferrar Glacier and in 5 days had reached Finger Mountain, in 1/3 of the time it had taken Armitage. 2 days later they established a depot at Depot Nunatak, but had to shelter there for a week from a fierce blizzard. On the 12th of November the trek resumed, up a gradual incline to a height estimated by Scott's barometer as 2,900 metres. In clear weather 2 days later they viewed a great frozen plain, from which they spent the next 18 days plodding across until the 1st of December, when Scott decided to turn for home. With the wind at their backs, they made good time to Depot Nunatak, which they reached on the 15th of December, restocking supplies, including a new sledge. Next day, at the old camp on Knobhead Moraine, Scott decided to turn north to explore the northern arm of the Ferrar Glacier, which later was named the Taylor Valley. On the 17th of December, Scott described entering an extraordinary valley, a very wonderful place containing no living thing, not even a moss or a lichen. He remarked, "Even the great glacier which once pushed through it has withered away, leaving a dry valley devoid of life, apart from the skeleton of a crab-eater seal, leading Scott to call it the Valley of the Dead." A tourism zone has now been designated at this very spot, near the Canada Glacier, where safe and easy access and movement within the area can be reasonably assured. This was the area we were to visit. Scott and his party returned safely to the ship on Christmas Day, having discovered and named many of the landmarks in the dry valleys. Our exploration of the dry valleys began at Cape Royds, from which we steamed across McMurdo Sound towards New Harbour.
Everything's frozen on deck. It's really, really bitter outside. And the sea is starting to refreeze on the surface as well.
The fierce wind had faded almost to nothing, but the temperature was still hovering around minus 12 degrees Celsius.
Coast of Victoria land that we're heading for. We're aiming to get into the dry valleys today, a little later, in about an hour or so's time. It's now 11:15 a.m. on St. Valentine's Day.
The deep frozen air encourages the formation of ice spicules at the surface, giving the water an appearance like an oily slick. This is called frazzle ice. As the crystals coagulate, they form a soupy layer on surface called greasy ice. Further coagulation forms spongy white lumps a few centimetres across called sugar. The sugar lumps grow bigger until they reach the pancake ice stage. We were to see plenty of this over the next few days. It is great for a spot of ice diving. As we made our way closer to New Harbour, patches of sea ice up to a metre thick slowed progress considerably.
Pushing and shoving our way through all this, banging and crashing. We're sort of negotiating a pack ice here, our way up to the dry valleys, and hoping to set the ship fast in hard ice.
Greg Mortimer explained to us the importance of getting as close to the coast as possible so our destination would be within the range of the helicopters.
How much fast ice or heavy pack ice? Because to go in and land in the dry valleys is a reasonably long way in a helicopter. If there's a lot of fast ice or heavy pack ice out here, it's a very long way in a helicopter, potentially too long.
Big lumps of ice here are a couple of metres thick underneath. There's no way that even this size ship's going to break them up. On the horizon there you can see some quite large icebergs broken off one of the glaciers.
The western coast of the Sound was littered with stranded tabular icebergs.
It's the ice there over. It's the ice mark.
Oh, bump, we've hit another crunch.
Around 1 p.m, the cloud began to clear and we could begin to distinguish some of the features in the valleys. A little closer and we were through the ice into a patch of clear water beside the fast ice attached to the mainland. Fortunately, this put us within the 40-kilometre limit on the helicopter transit flight. From the deck, we watched pods of orcas patrolling along the edge of the fast ice, hunting unwary seals and penguins who ventured too close. Orcas are quite abundant in the Ross Sea, with a population estimated at between 25,000 and 27,000. In Antarctic waters, their skins are covered in plankton, which gives them this brownish-yellow hue, rather different from the dazzling white of those in the northern hemisphere. With a few hours to wait for our turn for a ride into the Taylor Valley, a few took a Zodiac over to the edge of the fast ice to get closer to the orcas.
Well, whichever way, if you're definitely right.
The crust above surface is about 20 centimetres thick, with about 1.5 to 2 metres extending below. It is quite safe to walk on as long as you avoid any cracks. You can appreciate how the crunchy, rough and uneven surface made such slow going for Armitage and his party man-hauling their sledges. This crab-eater seal was keeping a safe distance back from the range of the predatory orcas. Offshore, a pair of minke whales were spouting as they fished for krill. Minke whales are small and easily identified by their distinctive curved dorsal fin, which is set well back along the body. Minkies are relatively abundant compared to the larger whale species. The International Whaling Commission estimated the population worldwide as 515,000 in 2004. Norway, Iceland and Japan continue to hunt them despite a moratorium on whaling, and they kill several hundred each year. The tapping on the ice must have worked, because this pair started to come in really, really close.
Yeah. He just wanted some reassurance. Here we go.
As they dived under our feet, their sleek, pointed heads with the single longitudinal nasal ridge could clearly be seen. After that excitement, it was almost an anticlimax to board the Red Baron for our scenic flight. The route would take us straight into the Taylor Valley. It would take about 15 minutes flying time to reach the visitor zone at the Canada Glacier. After liftoff, we flew over another boatload heading for the fast ice, no doubt also hoping to see some whales up close. Our track took us over the grounded iceberg at the entrance to New Harbour, one of many carved from the Ross Ice Shelf. To the south was the Royal Society Range. A left turn took us into the Taylor Valley, with Mount Barnes coming into view. Past Mount Barnes to the Wales Glacier. Ahead is the Commonwealth Glacier on the north side of the valley, with our destination about 10 kilometres further on. The Commonwealth Glacier is so beautifully symmetrical, it almost looks like a fake. The Aiken Glacier is on the opposite side of the valley to the Commonwealth Glacier. Crossing the Delta stream, we turned northwest to make our approach to the visitors zone. Just before landing, we had a magnificent view up the valley of the Canada Glacier. Disembarking, we were quickly replaced on board by the next departing passengers for their return to the ship. A wonderful view of the classic territory cirque, carved by a long-vanished hanging glacier, just one of the wonders of this valley.
It's 1 hour, isn't it, Pete? Yeah, it's about 1 hour. But just be alert, guys. It's about an hour. But it's that machine on its second run, so it's going to come back once more. That's not you. But the next time it comes back, we need you here 5 minutes before then. Yeah. So it's about 55 minutes. Really, just watch what's going on. We don't want to have to be chasing people. It mucks us up. So that'd be great. So just a little bit less than 1 hour. Yeah.
Where's the best place to go?
We were then free to explore for ourselves. Most people chose to stroll down towards the front of the glacier. There was a lot to try and see in the space of just 1 hour. On the way to the glacier was the carcass of a seal, one of 3 within the visitor zone. Just like Lieutenant Robert Scott in 1903, we marvelled at the dogged persistence of these seals to drag themselves over 40 kilometres from the shore to this desolate spot in the valley. At the boundary of the visitors zone, Dr. Harry Keyes, our New Zealand Department of Conservation guide, pointed out an area that had contained live cyanobacterial mats, although we could not find any.
It's getting really hard to see.
What colours are they?
The colours are dark.
Same, yeah.
Yeah. Rich orange colour. Similar to those jackets.
Wow.
And then under...
Tim,
just a few
you
years
shouldn't
ago.
have gone swimming.
Just a few years ago, this woman discovered microbes.
Living.
Yeah,
In
viable microbes come out, and they've been under the ice for, well, she reckons up to 2 million years. I think maybe up to 100,000 years. So, give or take. Million.
Pushing down to the meltwater lake at the foot of the Canada Glacier, it was no surprise to find it frozen solid, given the temperature, notwithstanding the lovely sunshine, was a balmy minus 10 degrees Celsius.
We're standing on a frozen lake in the dry valleys, and the lake has living algae in it, believe it or not, forcing its way through the ice, and all of that rubble-strewn area between here and the hills has little lichen and mosses in it. You have to walk on boulders to try and avoid grinding the lichen underfoot.
Walking on the lake, you can see the surface is pitted with bubbles.
That's amazing.
And as the ice is freezing, they come up, and it freezes.
Yeah.
And then there's another freezing event, maybe another night, and it captures more bubbles. Then there's another freezing event next night. So the ice is gradually thickening with time.
Yeah.
Maybe it's, I don't know, it's growing maybe 1.5 centimetres a night or 2 centimetres a night. So all these bubbles in layers, and so when the water freezes, obviously it's warmer.
Yeah.
And the water vapour in the bubbles is quite relatively high amount of water vapour. And then as it gets colder, the water vapour condenses, and so you get this white stuff, which is, you break one of them open. You see, well, it looks like snow, but it's just actually frozen water vapour.
Wow.
It's very cool.
That's very cool.
So whether the algae is putting out more oxygen around the edges, and this is oxygen in here, or oxygen rich air. I don't know. Yeah, good one, Ben. It's fantastic. I've been all day coming looking at these things. And Ollie's been.
The lake contains some of the richest algae growth in the dry valleys and is valuable as a reference site for other dry valley ecosystems. Moving closer to the face of the Canada Glacier, you begin to appreciate its size. Some people were brave or foolhardy enough, depending on your point of view, to approach very close to the toe of the glacier, which is clearly quite unstable. If you assume that today is not your day to be buried, you can get some really good photos of icicles. Moving away from the glacier, it's worth taking a short hike up the adjacent moraine. Along the way, you get some great views of the western end of the lake and glacier, as well as the spectacular peaks of the Kukri Hills, especially the curvaceous crescent of Koi Peak. A truly amazing array of different rock types are piled up to form the moraines in the valley. Some have been used to form stone cairns to mark the trail. How did they get here? It was all done by a giant bulldozer called the Taylor Glacier. The valleys are very old. Around 50 million years ago, the once lush, forest-covered Antarctica began to cool and then to freeze as Australia joined the other fragments of the supercontinent Gondwana in moving north. I'll just explain why I say around 50 million years ago. One of the joys of science, well, to me anyway, is that nothing is ever certain. You will sometimes hear the claim that the science is settled, but this simply displays a complete ignorance of what real science is all about. Science in any form is not a body of established facts. Science is really nothing more than a body of persuasive arguments that try and explain the observations we make of our world. The geological time scale is a good example. This table has evolved for over 150 years and is still evolving. The invention of radiometric dating by Ernest Rutherford in 1905 has allowed for absolute ages to be assigned to the various subdivisions. These are constantly being refined and improved in precision as more data comes to hand. Consequently, I'll always prefix a reference to geological time with the word about or around or approximate. There is often more than one explanation for a given body of data. How do we decide which explanations are reasonable and which are not? The Greek philosopher Aristotle in 330 BC led the way in proposing the principle now known as Occam's razor, attributed to the 14th century philosopher William of Ockham. This recommends choosing the hypothesis with the fewest assumptions when selecting between competing interpretations of the same set of data. It is also known as the principle of parsimony. To Occam's razor, we might add that the most likely candidate is the one that survives the most rigorous testing and still fits the data. Even better if it not only explains the current situation, but can accurately predict what might happen next. In other words, it is predictive. An important contributor to geology is the use of radiometric dating, which satisfies Occam's razor. The method compares the abundance of a naturally occurring radioactive isotope within the material to the abundance of its decay products, which form at a known constant rate of decay. Radiometric dating tells us that the first glaciers pushed their way towards the coast from the frozen polar plateau about 14 million years ago, grinding out the valleys. A warming cycle commenced around 8 million years ago, with temperatures rising by 10 degrees Celsius, and the glaciers retreated, followed by another ice age at least 10 degrees Celsius colder than today's annual average temperature of minus 20 degrees Celsius, prompting the advance of the Taylor Glacier about 3 million years ago right down to McMurdo Sound. And so on, even into the modern era 10,000 years ago, when the valleys were much warmer and drier than today. This brings us back to our smorgasbord. The oldest rocks exposed in the moraines of the Taylor Valley are strongly deformed Neoproterozoic metamorphosed sediments of the skeleton group. The rocks of the skeleton group are dated around 650 million years ago. They include schists, quartzites, metaconglomerates, calcsilicates, marbles, and metavolcanics. Around 500 million years ago, the skeleton group was intruded by granites of the Granite Harbour Intrusive Complex. The granites range from an unusual orbicular granite to more typical hornblende biotite varieties to this rather weird monzonite. Some of the granite boulders have been scoured by the wind into artistic sculptures. The older rocks were later uplifted and eroded. This old land surface is called the Kukri land surface, on which was deposited the thick sandstone sequence known as the Beacon supergroup, when the region later sank below sea level about 400 million years ago. The sandstones are widespread and form the spectacular cliff scenery of the upper Taylor Valley. The younger units of the Beacon supergroup include Permo-Triassic coal seams, some of high quality, of the Weller coal measures. Abundant fossils, including preserved tree trunks, are a feature of the coal beds, which are commonly in excess of 4 metres thick. Weller coal measures are exposed in a narrow belt that extends along the edge of the polar plateau in southern Victoria Land. The early stages of the breakup of the Gondwana supercontinent in the early Jurassic was accompanied by widespread igneous activity across Antarctica, southern Australia and Africa. In Victoria Land, this is marked by the emplacement of the Ferrar group of dolerite sills and dikes around 180 million years ago. These are beautifully exposed in the upper Taylor Valley and form one of the most photogenic landscapes in the area. The dolerite boulders in the glacial moraines have, like the granites, been sculpted and polished by wind erosion. Which brings us back to the top of the moraine pile in the visitors zone, with our time on site running out. Taking off, we headed for the Commonwealth Glacier, flying close to the floor of the valley. This gave us a good view of the surface indentations, presumably caused by meltwater flow. A little further on, we flew over a refuge hut used by scientists investigating Lake Frixell. A quick swing by the Commonwealth Glacier, and a zooming flyby the stranded iceberg. In no time, we were back at the ship. A lovely clear evening to view the beauty of Mount Erebus. After such a fulfilling day, there were plenty of good yarns to exchange over a few beverages.
A mate in Queensland, they used to be able to turn on the TV. Joe's on TV, Joe's on TV. All the kids used to come around. It was a bloody comedy hour when Joe was on TV.
This took us through to midnight for another view of the midnight sun illuminating Mount Erebus and the pancake ice which surrounded us. The ship then headed south down McMurdo Sound for our next stop, McMurdo Station, the main US base in Antarctica.